real briefly, again, that's the focus of next Thursday's open book test, Chordata. There will be an open book test next Thursday covering the entire phylum, and so we will be doing some review. The basis for that will be the lectures that I gave during the staying at home time, but really based on the textbook. Okay, so it will be open book, you'll have access to it, and we're going to make it kind of a more fun activity than just your normal cram and regurgitate test, which is what it would be to have that much material. Just would be madness. So this is the graphic I was talking about yesterday. This is a pie chart of the animal kingdom. Take a look at that. It's really astounding when you see it presented that way. More than 2/3, or almost exactly 2/3 insects. You can see the vertebrates at the bottom. Why does this make sense ecologically? If we're just thinking about, say, insects and class Aves, why is this a logical approach to engineering an ecosystem by our orderly Father in heaven? Yeah.
Well, you need more insects than birds because the birds eat the insects, and so you need a bigger amount of insects than birds.
Yeah.
Use that balance.
It's that simple. This trophic, they call it a trophic pyramid, where you have the most abundant creature at the bottom and the least abundant creature at the top. It tends to be the top of the food chain, and then at the bottom, the primary producers, the phytoplankton, the algae, providing food for all the insects and these other invertebrates. So it's a very logical system, but when you see it depicted this way, it's rather poignant. I will skip over, I'll review this really quick before we get to Aves, just since we haven't met together and talked about this. You know that there are three major characteristics that all of the chordates have. So phylum Chordata, it seems kind of like a weird assemblage of creatures. Really, we have two phyla that are a lot smaller, or subphyla that are a lot smaller, the urochordates and the cephalochordates. And then we have the vertebrates. And the urochordates really seem a lot more like sponges or some other type of sessile organism. Remember those sea squirts, those tunicates? So they have a notochord, which can turn into vertebra in a vertebrate creature. But they also have those pharyngeal slits. If you remember those pharyngeal slits that will eventually, in fish during development, will turn into gills. In terrestrial creatures, it turns into part of the jaw and some of the other head features during gestation. So we have the urochordates, the tunicates, the sea squirts, and then we have the cephalochordates, and then the vertebrata. So notochord, pharyngeal slits, and then the third one is the dorsal nerve cord. So those are the three characteristics of the entire phylum. All of these creatures have them, and the punchline is at some stage in development, right? So that's how scientists have justified putting subphylum Urochordata in the same phylum as the vertebrates, because they do have a notochord for a little while. Then it dissolves and turns into different tissues. They don't have a notochord as adults. And so that one may seem a little bit arbitrary, but their rationale, they're sticking to their diagnostic features. And just a review of the whole phylum there. The sea squirts, Urochordata, slipping my mind, the lanceolets in Cephalochordata. The lanceolets are really interesting. They are almost seem like a headless fish. If you remember looking at the slides, yeah, they seem to have flesh, and they have this stiff notochord, but they just burrow in the sand with their head part up. They don't really have eyes, they don't have a jaw, they just have these little kind of feelers, tentacles, that they snatch bits out of the water and filter feed that way. So very different than the vertebrates. And so I think the subphylum designations is a good one. The vertebrates are very different than those two groups. And so this is the intro to vertebrata slide. And just giving you a taste of the diversity here. That's the cassowary I was talking about at the bottom right. They have these very strange, bony, horny shield on top of their head and this long wattle, kind of reminiscent of a turkey. If you've seen a male turkey during the breeding season, they really get blue and red. So similar type of bare skin and a lot of capillary action going on there. Several different other vertebrate species, of course, a dart frog, a crocodile, a opa, the first warm-blooded fish that we know of. That fish there is warm-blooded. Tuna, several species of tuna are also thought to be seasonally warm-blooded. And then this, I believe, is some type of marsupial mouse at the very bottom. An interesting group of vertebrates. Class Aves, here we go. And there's that beautiful parrot. I love that photo. So we're going to have a little bit of overlap today in what we talked about because of the tech problems. But a question for you, and we answered this already. What kind of symmetry do all vertebrates have? Bilateral. And maybe a harder question for some, not for everyone. What creature is this? Great horned owl. Anyone can do a great horned owl impersonation?
Yes.
Anybody want to?
I'm doing it.
You can, but you won't.
Right now.
So do it, yeah. I like that, Judah. Right, doing the non-vocal impression of the owl. That's good. So it goes something like this. And you can talk with them, and they actually get kind of silly, and they start making this really weird kind of monkey sound. So if you hear a great horned owl, they clammed up mostly now. Owls breed really early. They start building their nests in January, laying eggs in January, February, and so they're really vocal in the winter. So going outside at night, it's already dark at 5 or 6, go outside and listen for 15 minutes. Almost anywhere in Moscow you can hear a great horned owl. There are also barn owls around. And barn owls make a sound that makes you want to turn tail and run back inside.
Can you
And I can't
perform
imitate that sound.
Oh,
I would be scaring, I'd be scaring myself. If I made that. They are scary sounding. The only, yeah. Anyway, total number of species, an impressive number. I had to do quite a bit of homework to get these figures on various databases. There's a lot of information out there, and a lot of it really was kind of ambiguous or not very definitive and kind of guesswork. But I was surprised. Anything here surprised you? I guess that's the question with these numbers. 70% of the world's water, that makes sense. Fishes. I was surprised at the number of reptiles. Really high. And, to be honest, amphibians. Mammals quite low, and it's interesting if we talk about a species and try to define a species, and we talked about that when we learned about Darwin's finches, and we went back and forth a little bit as to how do you actually constitute a species? What are the definitive characteristics? And the main thing is, lack of being able to produce fertile offspring. Mammals are further subdivided up into subspecies. And so if we included subspecies, it would be something like 13,000 plus mammals. But I think that's just a factor of we look more closely at mammals. We don't look at salamanders as closely as we look at rhinoceros, right? So there are multiple subspecies of rhinoceros where we might look at a red-skinned newt and think, oh, it's just a newt. So I think we tend to overlook differences of creatures that are lesser known or smaller, and that's partially, kind of unavoidable. But interesting just to look at the total number, 70,000 species of vertebrates, that's significant. And so think about how many kinds might have been in here, and a pair of each kind was on the ark about 4,000 years ago. It's quite the zookeeper role for Noah, jealous still. That's a rainbow bee eater, an Australian bird, insect eater, bee eater in particular. Just reviewing some of the major characteristics of the group. We have that toothless bill, that's keratinized, 4-chambered heart, an endothermic creature. What does endothermic mean?
Warm-blooded.
Warm-blooded. Does that mean that blood is actually warm
Yes.
compared
Yes.
to
Technically.
a
Technically,
cold-blooded
yes.
creature?
Oh.
Well, I mean, if you like,
Elijah?
No, they are able to make their own heat, but the blood is about the same temperature.
Yeah, and if there's a lizard basking in the sun, it might actually have warmer blood than a warm-blooded creature that's elsewhere in the shade. So endothermic's a little bit better descriptor of how that works. Pulling up a lot of tropical birds here. I can't resist the cassowary again. So they are oviparous. They're egg-laying creatures made of that eggs made of calcium carbonate. We have some eggs here. We're gonna take a look at these eggs in a little bit, the innards of these eggs, and talk about what they're constructed of. Internal fertilization, there's some variability in the reproductive parts, especially of male birds. And so they actually do have an organ that comes out of the cloaca and is used to inseminate the females. And with ducks in particular, it's just kind of a strange, almost like turn your head away organ. It's called an intermittent organ, and it's it looks like a screw. It's spiral shaped. It's a spiral shaped organ, lots of surface area for passing on sperm. Probably too much information, but there you go. I was involved in a research project where they were actually trying to breed a certain endangered duck species, and so I learned and saw too much about ducks during the course of that summer, and I can't forget it, unfortunately. But still a remarkable anatomical feature. They were using a species of duck as a surrogate to hopefully come up with a way of captive breeding this endangered duck species. So do you think, which of these two birds do you think has the porous, hollow, kind of strutted bones? That beautiful little Hawaiian
Yes.
honey guide up there, or this big bird down below?
big bird.
Yeah.
Oh,
The
that way.
small one.
The cassowary with hollow, you can just see the cassowary taking off. Right?
Graceful.
Very graceful, the dancing cassowary. It's definitely that little songbird. And cassowaries are actually quite aggressive and could do you harm. Okay, here we go. This lines up with some of our looks at the we had at the hawk yesterday. And so a reminder of some things. And I misspoke yesterday when I was talking about flight feathers. And I'll let's see. I'll turn on the light briefly here and just pull out our hawk again so I can correct my mistake. And so yesterday, when you see how the wing moves, now it's frozen solid, hasn't had time to thaw it off. That's not gonna work. Yesterday, I pointed to, it worked better with the sparrow, didn't it? Let me get the sparrow.
This has been a bird dog. What? It just turned into
How many times can you freeze and thaw a bird? This wing's probably a little bit more pliable. I pointed to some different feathers, and so the long wing feathers that extend the furthest out, those are called the primaries. I mistakenly referred to the feathers that cover the tops of them as the secondaries. Well, in fact, the secondaries are further back on the wing, and they're also flight feathers. And so I just wanted to point out that that mistake yesterday. It'll be more visible here on the screen. So I'll pull that back up. But you should know that term. And so that yellow region, those are the secondaries. So the primary flight feathers are in orange, and the secondary flight feathers are in yellow. Okay. The preen gland, mentioned that briefly, where they get oil to preen their feathers, their fused tail, the outer ear, the keeled sternum, and then the keratinized scaled feet and legs. Questions about any of this, just kind of general anatomy here? I might have talked about this yesterday, and I might have mentioned it previously as well. We talked about keels, I believe. This keeled sternum, our sternum is flat. Bird sternum is turned 90 degrees. And so its sternum is like this. Why in the world? What's the function there, Solomon?
I was gonna say something and then I realized that it was wrong, and I wasn't gonna keep
You
going.
realize you're on video.
Yes.
This is like a conscience. There's like a group conscience.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go with why.
Is it for aerodynamic? Being aerodynamic?
I would say yes in part, and we'll get to why in a second. Elijah.
But does it work like a heel on ship, keeping it stable in flight?
So it keeps it stable. There's a huge amount of surface area on either side of this keeled sternum. What goes there? Now,
Is it the air, not the air bladder, like whatever they were, the huge air puffy things?
good guess. It's not the air sacs. Lena?
Well, there's lots of space for the muscles to attach to.
It's that big, if you eat that chicken breast, it's big because it can attach to a massive keeled sternum. So those are the flight muscles. And of course the chicken is not going to be flying much. That's why its breast meat is white. If you've ever eaten duck or seen duck breast meat, it's dark because it's full of capillaries. Why is it full of capillaries? Because you can't even count that duck's wing beats as it flies. So it's all dark meat because it's fat and full of capillaries. And so that's the pectoral muscles attached to that keeled sternum, and makes for very powerful flight. Yeah.
So why is their neck shaped that way, like kind of scoliosis?
Why do all birds have right? Why do all birds have scoliosis? That's a good question. I would say probably a wide variety of reasons. One reason that occurs to me is their feeding behavior. They often extend to feed. Or if you think about a great blue heron in flight, they're really diagnostic in flight because most birds' necks are straight in flight. The great blue heron does this in flight, and you can actually see that crooked neck as they fly, which is unusual. And so, but when they fish or when they're after those frogs, it serves a pretty function. So my guess is they're when they keep it back in there, it's more aerodynamic when it's curved like this, and it probably retains heat better. But then when they need to eat, they can extend it. So two probable reasons there. And you do see a wide variety of differences, even in some of these features in different bird groups. All right. I had a lot of fun on this website. This is from Cornell, actually. And you can select different features to click on or off, and I added the labels, and we'll go to that website eventually, maybe today or tomorrow. But looking here, there's that lovely gizzard. Okay, let's talk about some of these features. So I think this is where we left off, as far as what we talked about in lecture yesterday. And so, of course, they have a 4-chamber heart. We mentioned that. We mentioned 9 inflatable air sacs, and they're in blue here. And just to retouch on those air sacs, I kept saying inflate instead of inhale, or vice versa. These birds breathe by inhaling. They can't inhale like we do because they don't have a muscular diaphragm under their lungs, compressing their lungs. But they do inhale, and the air simultaneously will start to go into some of the air sacs. And then as they exhale, fresh air from those air sacs then enters the lung. And so they actually are getting oxygenation during the inhale and the exhale. We can't do that. This is a shockingly efficient mechanism for birds that need a lot of oxygen, burning a lot of energy. And so they're constantly getting oxygen. This is why canary in the coal mine was a good idea. You put the canary in the coal mine. Have you guys heard that phrase before? There's a canary in the coal mine. That means it's a mechanism for detecting a potential danger, right? So the coal miners would bring a canary down with them, and if a canary died, then they were out of there. Because those poisons in the air were going to disproportionately affect that canary first because of how it breathes, constant oxygenation, and they might have time to escape before it negatively affected their lungs. So birds really efficient breathers because of those air sacs and because of those strange lungs that don't inflate or deflate. Okay, so air sacs are hard. The crop, and you might want to take notes on a couple of these features if you don't know these already. The crop of a bird, anyone know what a crop is? Not wheat, not lentils, not cropping the grass short or your hair short. Crop really has a lot of uses, doesn't it? This crop is it's a sac that's located near the trachea, and it actually inflates, or not inflates, it fills up with food. And so if you've ever, this is especially true with chickens, with game birds. If you look at a specimen of a game bird, like a grouse, for example, after they gorge themselves on vegetable matter and their crop fills up, and then they slowly will digest that food over time, so it can sustain them through the evening, as an example. I went grouse hunting last fall, shot a grouse, and brought it back to camp. This is maybe in December or November, and its crop was just full of snowberries and mountain ash berries and all these other berries. They store vegetable matter there. So that's the crop. It's part of the digestive system for storing food. And then the gizzard is a strange word. Other than that, I just have memories of my grandmother just loving the innards of the chicken mixed in with the chicken gravy. So I always have to share that story, just because it's gross, but it gives me fond memories of my grandmother. Gizzards in the gravy. I can't imagine eating that. But the gizzard is a really neat mechanism. And have you ever, if you raise chickens, what do you give that chicken in addition to its regular food and water? Alice?
Like gravel or like some small stone.
Yeah, you give it some grit. It needs grit. It needs some finely ground rock or some similar material, and it's going to periodically eat that grit, and that grit is stored in its crop. If you dissected, its gizzard. If you dissect that gizzard and open it up, it's this really powerful muscular second stomach, is really what it is. It's a second part of the stomach. But they're often full of rocks, and so they help grind up all that vegetable matter. Plant matter is incredibly hard to digest, which is kind of ironic. But it's way harder to digest than meat. And so that grinding process helps to digest all that seed and vegetable material. So gizzard and crop, key ingredients here in the anatomy of the bird that we don't see in a lot of other creatures. Inflatable air sacs, we see the lobed brain here, very well developed in birds, more developed in birds than reptiles and amphibians, really, really big olfactory lobes up there. Yes, ma'am.
Do predatory birds have gizzards since they eat meat a lot?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll have to look into that. I don't know if certain groups have reduced gizzards or if they have no gizzards at all. Good question. That's a good speculation. As far as reproduction goes, when we talk about birds, well, a lot of us know birds when we're driving down the road and something lands on our windshield, right? And in fact, there's a field guide to identifying birds via the windshield splatter marks. Of course, it's a joke, but it's kind of a fun idea, at least to me. And so birds have one opening. It's called the urogenital opening, and it's called whitewash. Their feces really looks like just whitewash, splatters of white. And their cloaca is the reproductive opening. That's where the internal fertilization occurs. That's where the egg comes out, and then the analog to the rectum in mammals is the vent. So the vent is the opening to the outside. So the egg would pass through the cloaca and out the vent, and the whitewash would come out the vent as well. Just a word on these air sacs. They don't have capillaries, they don't get nutrients, and they're as thin as a soap bubble. They're just remarkable. And it makes me think of how delicate some of the fixed-wing aircraft are. And aircraft for a long time actually had fabric coating before we were able to get metal thin enough. Most aircraft had fabric coating on the wings. Really delicate, light material. Yeah.
So is it possible for the air sacs to actually like pop, or?
I would assume so.
So-
Either by maybe some type of.
Something, or-
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that for a fact, but like a lung puncture, something piercing them, but also if there's a shock, I would imagine that could be strong enough to rupture the air sac. There is a look at, that's day 2. That's day 2 of a chicken egg. And we're gonna pull up a video. We might get to it today, we might do it tomorrow. Birds develop shockingly fast. Guess how long it takes for a chicken egg to go from fertilization to hatching?
Oh, we said like 36
A lot of you probably already know that. Why? 21 days.
So
21 days from a zygote, from a single cell to a fully formed chick. 21 days. Isn't that incredible? This is where the egg would be. This picture's kind of funny. Look, a close-up reproductive look at the bird. That's the position the egg would be in right before being laid. And so a little bit about bird reproduction. Of course, different birds will lay a various number of eggs. Many birds are designed to keep laying eggs, especially if eggs are removed.